First, let me start by saying how much I appreciate the work that Senators Wyden and Crapo did on this issue. I think their legislation is probably the most promising bipartisan solution that I've seen for, well, since we started seeing this sort of climate-induced fire cycle that seems to get worse every year in both treated and untreated areas. And so I think that's very encouraging. I want to talk a little bit about the McCain-Barrasso legislation simply because it would mandate certain levels of timber production on our national forests in the name of forest health. And first, let me say that timber contracts can absolutely be a useful tool for reducing the risk of catastrophic wildfires. And that applies to some areas in my state as well. But for the bulk of my state, we rely much more heavily on the Hazardous Fuels Reduction Program, on stewardship contracting, and on watershed restoration programs. And that is in part because many of the forests that we need to thin in New Mexico are dominated by very small diameter, ponderosa pine in particular, but other mixed conifer species as well, that are simply not economically viable. Either we don't have proximity access to a market, sometimes for even large diameter trees, or we don't have access to a biofuel facility like the one that I toured in Arizona with Senator Flake near the Apache sitgreaves. So we rely very heavily on the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, Legacy Roads and Trails, water source protection agreements like the Santa Fe Water Fund. And these have been held back by the uncertainties around, well, that are created by fire or borrowing. And my concern with that legislation is that by sending that money solely to timber contracting and defunding these other tools that are working in our forests, that we'd have an even worse fire situation in New Mexico's forests. And I think we need to figure out what tools are working where and use them, and not one to the complete exclusion of others. So I'd simply ask you, Chief, what would the impact on other Forest Service programs, including watershed restoration programs, be of meeting the timber mandates in Senator Barrasso's legislation and Senator McCain's legislation?
We do not have an administrative position on Senator Barrasso's bill yet. We haven't had a chance to fully analyze it. But I will share with you that I have concerns when we limit maybe prematurely as to what tool to use. And I would prefer for us to be able to look at the landscape and then decide what's the right approach to be able to do that work. There's no question that we need to do more hazardous fuels reduction. There's no question. I've been on the record for years now about the additional work we need to do to restore our forests. So I appreciate the Senator's support to be able to talk about recognizing the need to do more of that work. But I'm also concerned about where the funding would come from. And just now, as we see what happens every year, when we have to transfer funds, we have to shut down operations. And then each year, as the 10-year average keeps increasing every year, for instance, since FY12 to FY15, we had to increase fire suppression another $156 million. Now, with a flat budget, that's $156 million. It has to come out of all the other programs, which a lot of them are the ones that you mentioned. And so I have those concerns. I recognize the work that we need to get more work done. And then the other thing, we've made great progress of being able to set up a system where the public feels that they have the opportunity to be fully engaged in the work that's done out in our national forests. And I'm always concerned if there's anything that limits that participation, that I believe it's a step backwards, and it's something that will probably slow down the progress that we're making. So those are where I've testified on Senator Barrasso's forest bill. But the funding bill that McCain and Barrasso's put forward, that's the one that we haven't had haven't put an administrative proposal together. But once again, I just want to thank everyone's support for finding a solution to this issue.